formed your first impression of me based on how I walked up here and how I started my speech. First impressions of ideas are a little different. It's based off of novelty, the potential impact, and the feasibility of the ideas. I want to take you back to a time that a scientific idea was first proposed. We're going to go back to 1945, the year that nuclear science was introduced to the world. On August 6th of 1945, the first atom bomb was dropped in Japan and killed up to 177,000 people. 3 days later, on August 9th, the second bomb was dropped in Nagasaki and killed an additional 74,000 people. That's one mighty first impression on the world. Now, it takes 8 positive interactions to overcome a first impression. It takes 8 specific instances. In the nuclear context, for me personally, one example is my dad's a 2-time cancer survivor. He would not be alive today if it weren't for the nuclear medicine that helped save his life not just once, but twice. Now, in 1953, the first positive interaction that the world saw with nuclear science was from President Eisenhower. He gave his famous Atoms for Peace speech, which inspired the world to harness the science of the atom for peaceful purposes, ranging from medicine to agriculture to energy and everything in between. Because every technology has a light side and a dark side. So let's start looking at the light side for nuclear. Now, in the 70s, this was the time when America was highly focused on building energy independence. They wanted to be an isolated nation in a way at that point with their energy sources. Nuclear energy was welcomed and embraced. Throughout the 70s, there were 126 reactors planned for construction and 70 that were completed across the country. That's a lot of electricity. That's a lot of power. The idea was new. It had a massive impact on the communities and on the nation, creating 13% of America's electricity. And it was feasible. People saw these reactors being constructed in their backyards, in their homes. They saw the high-paying jobs. They saw everything that came with a nuclear power plant. Now, towards the end of the 70s, in 1979, there was an incident called 3 Mile Island. How many of you have heard of it? A lot of us, right? So 3 Mile Island, Unit 2, had a partial meltdown. From a technical perspective, there were 0 deaths associated with this, and the amount of radiation released to the environment around was under and within the federal limits set in place by the Environmental Protection Agency at that time. Now, I could feel some of you when I said radiation release go, right, like a little bit of a scary moment. But I want to address that. Radiation, it's okay to say the word. It's okay to say that's rad. You know? It's totally fine. Because every time you step outside, you're getting exposed to radiation. We have an understanding of it as people. If you're planning on spending long amounts of time in the sun, you tend to put on sunblock to help block from any harmful effects. Shielding time and distance. We understand how to protect from radiation. So that's an important thing to identify here. But in 1979, this partial meltdown happened. From a technical perspective, safety mechanisms worked. What didn't happen, and what wasn't planned on, was 15 days prior, a movie called The China Syndrome was released. How many of you have heard of it or seen it? All right, I have not seen it, actually. But I've heard that it's about a nuclear reactor that has a massive meltdown, and it melts through the vessel, it melts through the containment, and it goes all the way to the other side of the planet. And 15 days after this movie came out, a partial meltdown happened. Spoiler alert for the real partial meltdowns, it did not go through a reactor vessel. It still is within the containment building. It still is there. The science is proven and true. Now, as an industry, we took away some lessons learned from this specific scenario, and we've taken away lessons learned from every major nuclear incident that we can think of. Specifically for 3 Mile Island, we started what's called the Institution of Nuclear Power Operators, INPO, right? Every company, every industry has their acronyms, and congrats, we just learned a nuclear one. INPO is a database that, as nuclear engineers and workers, we put in every We put in every single thing that goes wrong at a nuclear power plant, ranging from dropping a pen in an area where a pen cannot be dropped because it's a foreign material exclusion zone, all the way to Fukushima and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. This database is a place where we take the time to learn from other people's mistakes, so we don't have to make them to learn those lessons. We take the time to recognize, okay, let's find out how we can do better, and let's find out how we can improve as an industry. Now, I went through, and at this point in time, this is about the 1999. There's 104 reactors in operation. That's creating about 20% of America's electricity at this point in time. All of those reactors that had been under construction and were proposed struggled to reach that completion line. Public perception was low for nuclear energy. There wasn't a lot of support for it. But here's the thing. In 2025, we still don't necessarily have overwhelming public support for nuclear. We've only seen 2 new nuclear reactors come online since 2000, but nuclear is gaining more momentum now than ever. But why? Especially in between, why of all people, why of all things, would some random girl from Wisconsin get involved in nuclear energy who knows nothing about nuclear science except bombs and Chernobyl and Fukushima and 3 Mile Island? So I'd like to tell you that story of how I got into nuclear engineering. I grew up in north central Wisconsin. We deal with snow all the time, so it was wonderful for me seeing the snow here this morning. I grew up in north central Wisconsin, and as a 16-year-old teenage girl, I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. As most 16-year-olds have no idea what they wanted to do with their lives. How many of you knew what you wanted to do when you were 16? For those of you that are saying yes, congrats, gold star, you're better than all of us. Okay? I wish I did. I knew I liked math, I knew I liked science, because it was either right or wrong. You know, when I got an English paper back and a teacher would be like, you're almost there, you're so close. Don't tell me that, don't tell me that. I'm either right or I'm wrong, okay? Don't tell me I'm almost there. I'm either there or I'm not. So I knew engineering would be an option for me. And I like to tell this story of how I came to nuclear, because 16-year-old me had infinite wisdom, right? So I'm going through the list of different types of engineering at a college that I was looking at, and I read mechanical engineering. Do we have any mechanical engineers here? Are you scared for what I'm about to say? All right. I read mechanical engineering, and 16-year-old me goes, that's too basic, I don't want to do that. I want to do something special here, right? So I go to the next one on the list, and I see electrical engineering. I say, no, thank you. My brother went into electrical engineering. There is no way I'm going to go into electrical engineering. I'm sick of living in this shadow. I see civil engineering. Civil engineering is really cool. My dad did it. I got to see him, and he would take us to construction sites as he built bridges and demoed them, and I thought it was awesome. But I sat there and looked at him like, yeah, it's cool, but he just pushes dirt around. So, like, do I really want to do that? Not really. Then I read nuclear engineering. All I know about nuclear science at this point in time is bombs, and there are maybe 2 nuclear reactors in the United States. Maybe 2. There's no way there's more. Nobody talks about nuclear. We don't say nuclear. We don't say radiation. We don't say these terms. It's not spoken about. But I read nuclear engineering, and I think to myself, man, what a flex it would be to say, I'm a nuclear engineer. Like, imagine that high school 50th class reunion. I'm going to win best career, right? I have to. So I go back home and I'm talking with my dad, and I'm like, okay, Dad, I'm thinking either nuclear or aerospace engineering. Not because I knew anything about them, but because they both just sounded really cool. And now my dad, he looks at me, his parent voice on, and parents in the room, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say parent voice on. And I ask him, okay, Dad, listen, I'm thinking nuclear or aerospace. What do you think I should do? And he looks at me and he goes, Grace, don't go into nuclear. There's no future there. Follow-up question for the parents in the room. What does a 16-year-old teenage girl do when you tell her not to do something? She goes and does it. She goes and does it. So I got into nuclear engineering out of spite against my father. I didn't have a good first impression of nuclear science. I didn't know that those cancer treatments were from nuclear medicine. I didn't know about this. And I'd like to take you through the 8 positive interactions that I had in that first semester of schooling that made me the passionate advocate that I am today. And there are many more than 8, but I promise you I'm going to keep it to just that. Number 1, the most shocking to me was that nuclear science is already a part of our everyday life. The science is just unspoken about. Right here in this room, smoke detectors. They use a radiological isotope of americium. The exit signs. The reason they stay on when the power goes out is because they have radiological isotopes in them. How many of you like bananas? How many of you have eaten a banana in the past week? Congrats, you just ate more radiation than you would get from living next to a nuclear power plant for an entire year. All right? Avocados, granite countertops, all of these things that are a part of our everyday life, they use nuclear science, or they are inherently radioactive. You are radioactive as a person. Aside from that, in the medicine world, I mentioned the cancer treatments. If you've ever had a surgery done, all of the tools are sterilized using radiological isotopes. If you've ever had an MRI scan, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. When they first introduced MRI scans to the world, they called them NMRI scans, nuclear magnetic resonance imaging scans. People didn't like the word nuclear, so they just got rid of it, and they called them MRI scans, and now they're used everywhere, right? So what's going on with that? Now, that's point number 1. Nuclear science is all around us in the world. But point number 2, let's talk about energy. As of today, here in America, we have 94 nuclear reactors operating, still creating 20% of our country's electricity. Now, I said earlier, in 1999, we had 104 reactors creating 20% of America's electricity. So if you do the math, we've got 10 less reactors. We're still creating 20% of our electricity from nuclear energy. And during that time, I promise you, the amount of electricity we use has immensely increased. So you don't have to be an engineer to see that the math is not mathing here, right? Something is not adding up. Now the difference here is throughout a nuclear power plant's long lifespan, they're still modernized, they're still upgraded. We see things like power uprates, where the same core that may have been loaded in the 1970s, we put that in a nuclear power plant today, and we can get twice as much electricity out of that same type of a core design. We can also make those cores last for longer. So in the 70s, a typical nuclear fuel cycle was a year before it needed to be refueled. New uranium oxide pellets put in. But now, those cycles can last up to 2 years. Companies are looking at extending that out to 3 years. The engineering, the modernization, and the technology has improved. Now I talked about the uranium oxide. That leads me to point number 3. What is nuclear fuel? And nuclear energy is the most dense form of energy. Nuclear fuel is, take it or leave it, not glowing green glue, okay? It does not glow, I promise. It just looks like a rock. It's about the size of the top knuckle of my pinky. Or if you like gummy bears, a fuel pellet, a nuclear fuel pellet, is about the size of a gummy bear. We stack a bunch of those fuel pellets up to make a fuel rod. We put a bunch of rods together to make a bunch of fuel bundles. And we put a bunch of bundles together to make a reactor core. Congrats, I spent a lot of money to get a degree that taught me some of that. You just learned it in a brief amount of time. Now, one of those fuel pellets creates the same amount of electricity as 1 ton of coal. MIT Climate Studies did a comparison of 1 nuclear power plant is also equal to 8.5 million solar panels worth of producing energy. And those solar panels don't consistently produce that energy. It's intermittent. The nuclear power plant stays on. Now, your next question out of that discussion might be, what are we going to do with a bunch of radioactive gummy bear-sized rocks, Grace? And that leads me to point number 4. We'll talk about that question. What about the waste? And the most important thing here to talk about is the term waste. In the nuclear industry, we're trying to get that changed to spent nuclear fuel, because this isn't waste. You can recycle 90 to 95% of that spent nuclear fuel and put it right back into a reactor. This is not a science problem, it is a policy problem. And now this might sound like some crazy theory that some guy who hasn't seen the sun in 10 years because he's been doing a PhD for the past 30 years or something developed, but this is real. Reprocessing is actively happening in France, in Russia, in India, and it's about to start happening in Japan, a country that has every right to turn away from nuclear, yet they've reopened 14 of their nuclear reactors, and they're aggressively pursuing the rest of the nuclear fuel cycle. So what about the waste? Between reprocessing and recycling, we can minimize that amount. Right now, we use what's called dry casks to store that spent nuclear fuel. Now that sounds very ominous, right? The word cask kind of makes you like, ugh, right? Makes me kind of, We have a branding issue. You can tell we're a bunch of engineers, not marketing people in the nuclear industry. These dry casks are not very exciting. They're just big old concrete cylinders. And once that spent fuel is cool enough, they go in those concrete cylinders and they sit out on a pad on the nuclear power plant facility. You can hug those cylinders, you can kiss them, you can be right by them. And because of that technology, there has never been any radiation leakage from the commercial nuclear energy generating industry here in America. I've been right by those dry casks. It's not very exciting. I wish it was, but it's not. When it comes to nuclear waste, it is not a science problem. It's a policy problem. Now that leads me to my next point. Number 5, let's talk about policy. For the first time in a long time, at the federal level, we're seeing bipartisan support for nuclear energy. This is new as of the past 2 to 3 years. And I just want to say that, again, bipartisan anything in America, what? I grew up Gen Z, right? I feel like I've always seen politicians fighting. So to find something that they even remotely agree upon is shocking to me. It gives me one little bit of hope that this might work and that this is the right way. Now, when we talk about policy, what used to be maybe a dozen bills proposed in support of nuclear energy each year has now grown to hundreds, with some of these bills passing through the House and the Senate with nearly unanimous votes. That is incredible. The Biden administration announced that they want to triple nuclear capacity here in America. And the current administration, the new Secretary of Energy, in his first secretarial order, announced that he wants to unleash the commercial nuclear energy industry in America for energy dominance. Bipartisan support for nuclear energy is incredible. Now that leads me to my next point, number 6 here. Something that isn't quite so bipartisan, but I want to ask you all to think about this question of what is clean energy? Because everything has a start and everything has an end in the energy generating world. And there is always some type of waste to come from energy generation. In nuclear, we can tell you exactly where every piece of our waste is because it's all sitting in these dry casks on sites, right? Not very exciting. Not any other energy industry can say that. Now, when it comes to clean energy, to me, it means emissions-free energy. Nuclear energy doesn't emit carbon. If you're interested in mitigating climate change, you need nuclear energy for reliable baseload power that's also clean. It doesn't depend on the outside environment. It shouldn't be 100% of the energy grid, but it has to be a part of it. Now, when we move to number 7 here, I want to take a moment to recognize North Carolina has 4 nuclear power plants. How many of you knew that? Some of you. Are you all going to Google where the nuclear power plants are? It's okay, remember, eating a banana, you get more radiation than if you live near one, all right? North Carolina has 4 nuclear power plants. Those power plants provide high-paying jobs and millions of tax dollars back into the community. And now number 8. Nuclear energy is the most reliable form of energy. It operates at 100% of its power output 93% of the time. The next type of energy closest to that is geothermal. The one after that is natural gas at 54%. Geothermal's at 74%. That's a big lead, if you ask me, when it comes to nuclear energy. Here in America, energy is a luxury. We don't see that, we don't recognize it. But it is a luxury. However, it's starting to be viewed as a necessity. That reliability is a key part of filling that desire of energy being a necessity. My ask of all of you here today is to start the conversation about nuclear. At your next family holiday gathering, bring it up with your crazy Aunt Linda. Get her to move past those first 7 seconds. Because you all took the time here today to move past those first 7 seconds of nuclear. And to learn about the 8 positive interactions that can not only change your mind, but the minds of the others around you too. So with that, start the conversation. Use the word nuclear. Use the word radiation. Use the word rad even. You know, when you go, that's rad, bro. 10 out of 10. I love that, all right? I love it. Love a good surfer, bro. That's rad, okay? But that little bit normalizes nuclear. Because at the end of the day, overwhelming public demand is the only way that we're going to get a clean, reliable grid here in America. And nuclear must be a part of that